Hey everybody, the next project on my 1966 Lincoln Continental is going to be removing the tilt steering column. Now you can follow along if you have a standard steering column. It is a little bit more complex given that I have the tilt mechanism, but let's go ahead and jump into this part of the project now. It is much easier to remove the steering column with the front seat out of the car. As you can see, mine is already out. I will link to that in the description. However, we can now get started on removing the steering wheel. All right, the first thing we're going to want to do is pull off the horn ring. It should just be held on with a couple of tabs. Yep, just those few tabs right there. Next, we're going to remove the steering wheel nut using a 3/4 inch socket. Once removed, we're going to just thread it on a couple of turns. That's going to do a couple of things. First, it's going to protect the threads. And two, it's also going to protect your face from getting smacked with the steering wheel. Don't ask me how I know that. Next, we have our steering wheel puller, which is going to be the main mechanism here, plus the 2 bolts. Now, I have the Lisle part number 45000. It comes with 3 sets of bolts. One of those sets should work for you. You'll see that there's 2 bolt holes here. This is where these are going to bolt in with this piece in the center. Now, using a 14 millimeter, I found that the 14 millimeter was a little bit more snug than the 9/16. We're just going to turn this clockwise and it'll start to pull the steering wheel. Next, we're going to remove this lower dash panel underneath the steering column, and it appears that it's being held on with 6 screws around the top and sides and 2 5/16 bolts underneath. All right, we're going to now lower this down, and this now exposes some wiring. So I'm going to disconnect these 3 wiring connectors as well as 1 ground over here, and then we can take out this lower molding. All right, with that molding piece out of the way, it now exposes everything that we need to do on the inside of the car. And the first thing that we're going to have to remove is this plastic piece, which is being held on with 2 Phillips headed screws. Once this is removed, we're then going to move further down the steering column, and you'll see that it exposes 2 half-inch bolts that are holding the main support for the steering column. So we'll take that out. And once those 2 half-inch bolts are removed, we'll go to the firewall here, and we're going to remove these 4 3/8 bolts. All right, hit our first hiccup. So got the first bolt out, no problem. On the second bolt, as you can see, it's nearly out. However, there is either a cage nut or a case nut on the back side that this screws into that I cannot hold. So it either is now freely spinning or it is now broken loose, and I can't get this out. So I'm going to continue on. I'm now going to work on the firewall, and I'm going to come back to this later and continue on with the process. All right, we're now in the engine bay where we're going to remove the rag joint from the steering column. And the way we're going to do that is just remove this one 12.7/16 bolt. There's another one on this side as well that connects to the steering box, but since we're only working on the steering column right now, we're just going to remove this 1 bolt. All right, we're back on the inside cab of the car, and I had a little bit of work done that was off camera just because I didn't have enough room for lighting and camera. But as you can see, this bracket is now down. That bolt is now off, and actually that bolt is right here. I had to grind the head of that bolt off. Now, in the conclusion of this video, I will go through the different steps and methods that I tried to go through in order to release that bolt unsuccessfully, but it's now down. Now let's go through the rest of the process to get this tilt steering column out of the car. Currently, the steering column is resting on a brace that is just underneath the column, and I'm going to drop that out of the way, but before doing so, I'm going to rest the steering column on a jack stand so I can get to the hardware, and that will allow the column to drop down more, which will then allow me to access both the electrical connections and any vacuum lines that need to be removed. All right, with the steering column now off of the bracket, it's going to expose the hardware. Now there should be 2 5/16 bolts here. 1 is missing, so we just need to get the one off of this side, and then when we come to the other side, we'll come over here and it will expose 2 more 5/16 bolts and 1 screw that's holding another bracket that goes back to the firewall. So we're going to remove all of that now, and that should allow the column to drop down to access that wiring and vacuum lines. All right, we can now lower the steering column down to expose the wiring and vacuum lines. Great, with that now dropped out of the way, we're going to go to the back of the steering column, and we're specifically going to go to the area where the neutral safety switch is, as well as the automatic parking brake release. Now there are two vacuum lines. One has already been removed. That was when we removed everything out from under the hood. And then there's this one that goes to the actual parking brake, removing that. And then you'll also see that we have the connection for the neutral safety switch. This had already been removed when we removed the brake booster. So that completes everything on the back side of the steering column. All right, there's three electrical connections we need to remove. As you can see, there's one wire that goes to the prindle, and then that goes up here. So we're just gonna unplug that. There's also the horn wire here, and then there's this plug for the turn switch. So we're gonna remove all three of those, and the steering column should come right out. But wait, there's more. Now that this is out of the car on the bench, I'm actually gonna strip the column down. Why am I doing that? I'm going to be sending out the steering column to get rebuilt by my friend Steve, who goes by 455 Hoda on the Lincoln forum. He's just rebuilt 3 of these. He had 3 donors. He rebuilt one for his car. The other 2 were salvageable, so he rebuilt those and is going to sell those. But he knows that I want to keep every factory part in my car, so he's going to rebuild this for me. So in order to strip it down, I'm going to take off the transmission shifter linkage, the mechanism for both the neutral safety switch and the automatic park release. There is an L-shaped bracket here that's going to come off, the turn signal switch, as well as the levers for the shifter, the turn signal, and the tilt column. So we're gonna take all of that off now, package it up, and ship it out to Steve. First, we're gonna start by removing the transmission shifter linkage, which is just being held on with a cotter pin. We're now moving to the neutral safety switch and the automatic parking brake release, which is being held on with 2 5/16 bolts. After we take that off, we'll also take off this L-shaped bracket, also being held on with a 5/16 bolt. Next, we're going to remove the turn signal switch. It's being held on with 2 5/16 bolts. After that, you see that there's a spring here. I'm going to remove that. And then also the cable assembly here is being held on with another 5/16 bolt. So let's go ahead and pull that off now. Next, we're going to remove the lever for both the tilt steering as well as the turn signal. Now, these can be just unscrewed counterclockwise. However, if it's difficult, you'll see that there's actually a notch here, so you could put a wrench on it. This is actually smaller than a 1/4 inch, so I'll probably just use an adjustable wrench to get these started. And now we can move to the third and final lever, which is the shifter lever, and it's being held on with a retaining pin. So we're gonna have to flip this over and we're gonna tap out that retaining pin. All right, the steering column project is now done, but I do want to comment on something I said earlier in the introduction, and that was when I had said that the manual steering column and the tilt steering column process for removal is different. Having done the job, I actually think it's going to be the same. I think the only difference is that the tilt steering column may be heavier. However, if you have a standard column and you found that the process is different, please comment below. But that now, again, completes the project. I'm now going to move to removing the dash, so stay tuned for more content on that. Take care, guys.